How does a man turn pain into art and art into survival? His genius spoke in symbols, crowns and broken bodies, and the world celebrated him. But behind the brilliance, this young man suffered drug addiction, abuse, and racism disguised as praise. The same world that celebrated his talents watched them suffer in silence. Fame lifted him fast, but it never protected him. He became a ghost at 18, a genius at 21, and a world legend by 25, only to be dead by 27. This is the dark story of Jean-Michel Basquiat, the boy who turned pain into art and art into survival, a mind too sharp for the world he was living in.
You can say something right now and it would inspire me to write a song or something to happen. You know, most kings just happen to be inspired by Basquiat drawing, you know, the drawing, and you had most young kings get their head cut off on the bottom. And I looked at that and I was like, it's powerful.
They said he was living too fast, but he carried history on his back. Before fame, he suffered racism, addiction, and loneliness. And when the spotlight found him, he still continued to suffer the same thing. You see, in this documentary, you are going to be hearing the darkest secrets about this famous young man called Basquiat. So sit down and relax. This is Fame and Fallout. To understand the lifetime and dark stories of Basquiat, we first need to visit his childhood. Jean-Michel Basquiat was born on December 22, 1960 in Brooklyn, New York City, a city that was already fractured by race, class, and power. His father, Gerard Basquiat, was a Haitian immigrant who believed deeply in discipline, respectability, and control. His mother, Matilda Andres, was Puerto Rican. She was emotionally expressive and drawn to beauty, book, and art. From birth, Basquiat existed between two worlds. He was black but not fully American in the way the country defined it, and he was also Caribbean but raised in New York because of his family's background. Basquiat grew up in a multilingual household, speaking Spanish, English, and French. He was frequently described as an Afro-Caribbean or Haitian Puerto Rican, surrounded by languages, accents, and expectations that did not always agree with one another. Even as a toddler, he was unusually alerted. Family members later described him as observant, intense, and curious, quiet at times, but watching everything. You see, this early attentiveness would become a defining trait that Basquiat did not just express in his life, he absorbed it. His identity was never singular. From the very beginning, Basquiat was learning to navigate contradictions. By age 4, Jean-Michel Basquiat was already reading and writing, which was an early sign of expectational intelligence. By 6, Basquiat was drawing constantly, on papers, on scraps, wherever he could. Drawing wasn't a hobby, it was regulation, a way to process the world. His mother encouraged this obsessively. She saved his drawings, praised them, and framed them. She saw something in him that felt fragile and brilliant at the same time. In May 1968, when Michel Basquiat was just 7 years old, a traumatic physical incident happened to him, one that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Basquiat was hit by a car while playing on the street in his Brooklyn neighborhood. The collision was severe that Basquiat suffered several internal injuries and a broken arm. He was rushed to the hospital where he underwent surgery to remove a part of his left abdomen, so he remained hospitalized for several weeks, which was a lonely and frightening experience for a young child. Now, to help him pass the time and cope with the pain, his mother, Mathilde, brought him a copy of the famous medical textbook named Grey Anatomy. You see, that book was clinical, cold, and detailed. Human bodies broken down into systems, muscles, bones, and organs. For a child who had just experienced physical trauma, it was both terrifying and mesmerizing. This was likely Basquiat's first conscious confrontation with mortality. The 1968 accident was the moment Basquiat's visual vocabulary was born. As Basquiat returned to school, he became increasingly aware of race, not abstractively, but socially. He was often one of the only black children in predominantly white space. Teachers recognized his intelligence but struggled with his restlessness. He was curious but not obedient. He was bright but unwilling to submit quietly. At home, his mother's mental health began to decline. Depression and instability crept in. The emotional anchor of his life was weakened. By then, the household felt fractured. His parents' separation became inevitable. His mother's condition worsened, eventually leading to hospitalization. In 1971, his mother suffered a mental breakdown and was committed to an institution. This was a devastating blow to Basquiat. That the only person who has been his greatest artistic champion was now physically and emotionally distanced. The one who took him to museum and encouraged his art was suddenly absent. So, his father assumed the full role of the household. He believed in structure and discipline. But his approach was rugged and authoritarian. You see, Basquiat's father does not have emotional experience. It was not encouraging. Then Basquiat began to rebel more frequently against his father's strict and traditional household. Jean-Michel Basquiat began acting out, not violently but deviantly. He challenged authority, he resisted rules, and withdrew emotionally. School became a battleground. Teachers saw a gifted student who refused to conform. His father saw disobedience. But Basquiat himself saw suffocation. At age 13, Michel Basquiat was sent to live with his father more permanently in Puerto Rico. You see, their relationship was intense because his father wanted him to succeed academically, to follow the rules, to become respectable. But Basquiat wanted freedom. At age 14, Basquiat was no longer just drawing. He was forming an identity around art. He dressed differently, he acted differently, he thought differently. At age 15, the conflict between him and his father had become intensified. Rules felt unbearable. Authority felt illegitimate. He ran away from home multiple times and was later found sitting on a park bench in San Juan, and when the police asked why he left home, he simply said he wanted to be alone. After that incident, his father would move him back to Brooklyn in 1976, but the rebel inside Jean-Michel Basquiat had fully awakened. By 16, he was back in New York, where he enrolled in Edward Murion High School. At that point, school felt meaningless to him. The curriculum did not reflect his reality. So he later moved away to attend City Arts School, which was an alternative high school designed for gifted children who didn't fit traditional system. Even there, Basquiat struggled with authority and concentration. It was there that he met Algiers, who was a graffiti artist. The two became fast friends and they began to craft a personnel together, which was later called SAMO, an abbreviation for Same Old Shit. You see, SAMO art wasn't traditional graffiti. It wasn't about tagging a name. It was just an art project consisting of poetic, philosophical, and sarcastical slogan. Eventually, Basquiat dropped out of school. This was not a moment of failure in his mind. It was liberation. By 1978, Basquiat's life at home was unbearable. He was staying out late, he was exploring city and neglecting his schoolwork. He began to care less about school and care more about art. It seems as though he was going to drop out of school. His final moment at school happened during a graduation ceremony, though he wasn't the one graduating. Now, in the act of performance, Basquiat showed the old school his rebellious side by filling a box with a shaving cream. He walked up to the principal during a speech and dumped it over his head. That was the most terrible thing to be done by a student. Now, knowing the consequences, he didn't wait to be expelled. He dropped out of school just 1 year before his graduation. And when he told his father he was quitting, his father told him that if he wasn't going to school, he could not live under his roof. So Basquiat packed a small bag of his clothes and left. It was almost as if he didn't care about what his father was going to do. Basquiat would later spend the next few months on the streets, at the park, or at the apartment of his friend in East Village. He lived between instability and possibility. He was broke, homeless at many times, but he was brilliant, angry, and free. When Jean-Michel Basquiat left school and effectively left home, he did not step into direct freedom. He stepped into uncertainty. He was only 17 years old. He was too young to be taken serious, too intelligent to be ignored by people who pay attention. He drifted between friends' apartments, street bench, and public space. Some nights, he slept indoor. Other nights, he didn't. Hunger was common, but stability was not. But New York City in the late 1970s was not booming. Opportunities were real. It was difficult to live out a shelter. Basquiat was not an observer in this environment. He was metabolizing it. He knew he needed something to survive. So he began selling hand-painted postcards and t-shirts to survive. Sometimes for a few dollars, sometimes for nothing. He painted on whatever he could find: cardboard, scrap wood, doors, and windows. You see, the lack of material did not limit him. It sharpened him. This was where art stopped being an option for him. It became survival. His creativity knew no limit. Basquiat became a guru of paint. He would take plain white shirts or scrap of cardboard and started sketching primitive drawings of crown and skulls on them. And then he would sell them for $10 to $5. These were the moments before SAMO art, just before the world noticed him. He was no longer a student or a son. He was now an artist. At 18, Basquiat's education moved fully into the street. His classrooms were nightclubs, loft parties, record stores, and sidewalk. He absorbed everything. He spent time at places like CBGB, mud clubs, and other downtown spaces where punk musicians, experimental filmmakers, graffiti writers, and early hip-hop artists collided. Basquiat began to listen more than he spoke. He watched how artists represented themselves, how scenes formed, how reputation spread. He learned quickly that visibility was currency, but also that it could be dangerous. By this time, he met Diaz, a fellow teenager and kindled artist. Diaz was also a graffiti artist, and together, they began something that would change the trajectory of Basquiat's life: the SAMO art. This is where SAMO was born. SAMO was the abbreviation of Same Old Shit. SAMO was not a person, it was an idea, a voice, a critique of everything Basquiat hated: empty religion, fake entitlement, shallow consumerism, art without soul. That was what SAMO meant. So alongside his friend Diaz, Basquiat began writing SAMO slogan across cities like Lower Manhattan, Soho, and Eastern Village. Basquiat was strategic. He didn't paint on subways like other graffiti artists. He painted on the street walls where wealthy gallery owners walked to dinner. He wanted the art establishment. He wanted them to see his name before they ever saw his face. So him and Diaz would go and find the high wall building and start painting on them. But to other people, the art looked meaningless. To Basquiat, it was SAMO art. These were not random graffiti lines. They were cultural bomb. Artists, musicians, and writers started noticing them. People would always ask, who is SAMO? The city whispered the name without knowing the face behind the artwork, which was Basquiat and Diaz. Jean-Michel Basquiat and Diaz didn't start as legends. They started as two sharp, restless teenagers who felt smarter than the world around them. Basquiat was barely 18 years old while Diaz was 19 years old at the time. You see, this partnership between these two young boys was one of the most significant friendships in art history. It was a coalition of two distinct styles. Diaz had this technical graffiti background, and Basquiat has this poetic, intellectual relentlessness. So together, they created a ghost that haunted the streets of Manhattan. It was called SAMO. At first, it was pure collaboration. They brainstormed lines together, debated wordings, redefined tones. Diaz brought structure and clarity. Basquiat brought chaos, rhythm, and instinct. It worked because they trusted each other. So it felt like a shared voice, anonymous, sharp, and untouchable. By 1978, people were noticing, and conversations started including the questions like, who is SAMO? That mystery was powerful. Writers talked about it, and artists quoted it. The Village Voices mentioned it. SAMO became less graffiti and more urban philosophy. You see, the art was not just graffiti. It was short message written on walls around the city. Those written messages were smart, angry, and funny to people. But as they were getting bigger, tension was breeding between Basquiat and Diaz. Then things started to change. which eventually led to the fallout of their partnership. It was a slow breakup caused by two friends wanting different things in their life. Now in the beginning, SAMO art was just a secret. No one knew who was writing the poetic message on the wall. Whether it was Basquiat or Diaz, they kept it a brotherhood secret. He was a classic graffiti artist who valued the code of the street. He would always say, "You do the work for respect of other writers and you keep your face hidden." In other words, he loved being anonymous.
SAMO was started out as a private joke. It came from the expression same old, right? Like you hear two older black guys, talking and say, "Hey, what's up, babe?" And one guy will say, same old, same old shit sort of thing. It was more about the timbre, the sound of the term.
But Basquiat was different. He was incredibly ambitious. He didn't just want to be a famous graffiti writer. He wanted to be a famous person. He wanted to be seen as a face behind his SAMO art, unlike Diaz. So he began hanging out at cool night parties like mood clubs, telling people, "I am SAMO. I did the SAMO art on the street." He started using the project to network with famous musicians and art critics. He was taking all the glory. So Diaz felt Basquiat was using their shared work to build his own personal brand. Diaz believed Basquiat was playing a fame game, anything for the fame. That was where the first conflict began. Not long after, the biggest turning point happened in December 1978, when a reporter from a famous newspaper called The Village Voice wanted to interview the people behind SAMO art, Basquiat and Diaz. Well, they both agreed to do it and they were paid $100 for the story. But when the article got released, Diaz didn't like the outcome because once their names and faces were out on the paper, they were not mysterious anonymous anymore. They were now known, famous more than they planned to be. Diaz didn't like the idea because he believed it killed the magic of SAMO. He also felt that selling their stories for a small amount of money was a sellout that was not worth it. But Basquiat, on the other hand, loved the idea so much because it was giving him the attention and the fame that he wanted. He didn't want to stay underground forever. He wanted to be known as a serious artist, not just a street writer. He always talked about galleries, fame, and breaking into the art world. But Diaz was more conscious. He liked SAMO as a street art movement. He didn't care as much about fame or money. He wanted it to stay raw and anonymous like it started. Now this difference created tension. Basquiat started spending time with new artists and gallery insiders. He was getting noticed. People started asking more about Basquiat and he was enjoying the attention. But Diaz felt pushed aside. He felt Basquiat was taking control and acting like SAMO was only his. Decisions were being made without him and their friendship started breaking down. Then came the big moment. In 1979, Basquiat went around the city alone, writing one final message on the wall. He was saying, "SAMO is dead." To make the fallout official, he did not fully explain it to Diaz first. He just went to the public and started telling people that SAMO art is dead, which defined the fallout between the both of them. For Diaz, this felt like a betrayal. SAMO belonged to the both of them. But Basquiat ended it alone, publicly on the streets, without his consent. Soon after, Basquiat moved on. Basquiat stepped into the fire after the split. He stepped into the greatest moment of his life right after that fallout with Diaz. Now, when SAMO ended in 1979, Jean-Michel Basquiat was 19 years old. The friendship with Diaz was over, but something else had begun. Basquiat chose visibility. He was done hiding behind the walls and anonymity. He was still struggling in the art world, and this period spanned roughly between 1980 and 1982. And that was when he truly became the global icon that we all recognize today. But before that time, before painting took over, Basquiat tried music. He experimented music. He formed a noise band called Grey. Basquiat didn't make normal song. It was experimental, raw, aggressive, just like his later painting. He formed the group with a filmmaker called Michael Oman after they met at a party in April 1979. They originally called themselves Test Pattern before Basquiat renamed it to Grey Band as a tribute to a medical textbook that was called Grey Anatomy. Now, this moment put him in New York's creative circle where painters, musicians, writers all started to notice him. Basquiat was no longer just a graffiti kid. He was now a musician. In 1980, Jean-Michel Basquiat took part in an art show that quietly changed his life. It was called the Times Square Show. At the time, Basquiat was 19 years old. He was no longer writing SAMO art on the walls, but he was still living day to day, unsure if art would truly save him. You see, this exhibition was different from normal art show. It was the first time he stepped into a building to show his work as a professional artist. Though it wasn't a fancy museum or a clean gallery. In fact, the exhibition was held in a dirty, abandoned 4-story building that used to be a massage parlor. A place surrounded by crime, sex shop, noise and decay. That settings matched the art inside it. So, the show was organized by a group called Collab, which was a collective of young artists who were tired of the boring artwork. They wanted something extraordinary. So the building they were going to use was raw, broken and uncomfortable, and that was the point. The organizers wanted art that reflected the real New York City. They wanted to create an exhibition that felt like the street of New York, that was always loud, crowded and diverse. So they invited over 100 artists to take over the building. You see, there was no famous names among the artists, therefore there was no rules on how to display the art. People started painting directly on walls, hanging stuffs around the place and filled the rooms with sculptures made from trash. Well, Basquiat was among them. In fact, he was given a prominent spot near the entrance of the building. But instead of bringing a traditional frame canvas, Basquiat painted a massive frantic artwork directly on the wall, combining his famous SAMO slogan with a skeletal drawing and symbol. You see, Basquiat's work at that show immediately stood out. His paintings were loud without shouting. They were filled with figures, skulls, crowns, bones, words and crossed out phrases that were raw symbols. While other artists were doing bright and pop culture art, Basquiat's work felt deeper and more dangerous. He was painting like Picasso. It was totally different. One of the most famous things he did during this show was that he used a red tape to write "free sex" over the door. And because the building was in a rough part of Times Square, people on the street thought it was a real advertisement for the building's old business. I mean, they saw "free sex" written boldly at the entrance. So people who were passing by thought it was another usual spot to have a free sex for the night. So many people started coming into the exhibition building. And to make matters worse, the other artists got nervous about the attention that Basquiat was getting and eventually tore down his painting. But the incident didn't bother Basquiat because he knew how to get a reaction from a crowd. He was used to it. For Basquiat, the Times Square show was a bridge between two worlds. He was still homeless and sleeping on the street, but at the same time, top art critics in New York were walking through the building, noticing his artwork and remembering his name. To the point whereby a very famous art critic named Jeffrey saw Basquiat's work and was blown away with his art. He described the work as a knockout and a mix of classical painting. This was the moment the art world realized that Basquiat wasn't just a kid with a spray can. He was a genius who understood history, anatomy, and social art. That 1980 exhibition feels like a warning and a promise at the same time. It marked the beginning of Basquiat's rise, but also the beginning of pressure that would later crush him. From that moment on, Basquiat was no longer invisible. He had entered a world that loved his genius but would later exploit his pain. After the Times Square show, everything began to move fast for Jean-Michel Basquiat. People in the art world started talking about him. Gallery owners, writers, and collectors wanted to meet the young artists they had seen in that broken building. Though Basquiat was still poor, but doors were now opening. He was invited to show his work again, this time in a more serious art space. In 1981, he took part in another important exhibition called New York and New York Wave. This show was even bigger. It featured over 100 artists, but Basquiat still stood out again. He was the only one giving an entire wall to himself. His display was so powerful that it caught the attention of every major art dealer and collector in the city. And shortly after that show, he met Andy Warhol, who was an art dealer and who provided Basquiat with his first serious workspace. It was a large basement studio which was under an art gallery and helped him to sell his artwork. It was there in late 1981 that Basquiat produced many of his legendary works, including his famous skull paintings. But the problem was that he was now tied to the business side of art, where pressure and control existed. The control that he never wanted earlier in his life with his friend Diaz is now getting that control under Andy Warhol. By 1982, Basquiat's career was becoming unchallengeable by other artists in the game. In that same year, Basquiat had his first solo exhibition. He was only 21 years old, yet his paintings were already selling for serious money. Museums in Europe noticed him. He traveled to Italy, Germany, and other countries. His paintings were sold quickly, sometimes the same day that they were painted. Collectors wanted more, and they were selling so fast. But at that point in his life, problems began to emerge for him. When Jean-Michel Basquiat's first real fame arrived, it did not come quietly. It came fast, loud, and confusing. After his first solo exhibition in 1981, the art world moved from ignoring him to consuming him. Critics, collectors, and curators all wanted a piece of him. But with that attention came something darker. The people wanted a control over the story of who he was, as they were also praising his work. At first, the praise sounded positive. Writers called him raw, instinctive, and primitive. They said his work felt untamed and street-born. These words were meant as compliments, but beneath them was a clear message. Basquiat was being framed as a natural force, not an intellectual one. His artwork was treated like an accident of chaos, not the result of thought, study, or discipline. That was the beginning of the stereotype and racism. You see, Basquiat was young, he was black, and suddenly became rich in a world that was mostly white people. That alone was a problem for him, because the white community were deeply uncomfortable with the fact that Basquiat was black and successful. So instead of being described as a painter who studied anatomy, history, and poetry, he was reduced to an image, an ordinary black man, which was so sad. As his fame grew, the language around him became sharper. The critique got bigger. The hate spread fast. The verbal abuse got wider. Basquiat was treated as a piece of garbage among the white community. Outside the gallery, racism followed him every day. He started seeing the world and the people inside of it in two different ways. Inside art galleries, it was paraded as proof that the art world was changing. But outside those spaces, he was reminded that the very little had actually changed. He was a nobody. As if that was not enough, the stereotyping got worse when money entered the picture. For instance, if Basquiat work sell fast in market, instead of people praising him, they accused him of producing too much and too fast. They said his work lacked control. They said he was burning out. The same speed that would have been celebrated as ambition in other artists was now framed as recklessness in Basquiat's work. Now this pressure began to isolate him. He started to pull away from people. He questioned motives. He felt watched, judged, and shaped by forces he could not control. The same word that celebrated him also stripped him of complexity. And by the time he met another great artist called Andy Warhol in 1982, Basquiat was already carrying the weight of this tension. But Warhol is the tension. Well, who is Andy Warhol? In 1982, Basquiat met Andy Warhol. Their relationship changed everything. You see, Andy Warhol was many things to Basquiat at once. He was a mentor, a collaborator, a protector, and sometimes a shadow. You see, Warhol was already a global art icon when they met in 1982, and his attention gave Basquiat instant credibility in elite art circle. They worked closely, they created art together, and they were often seen side by side. But their relationship also brought pressure, criticism, and imbalance. Some people said Warhol was using Basquiat. Others said Basquiat was feeding off Warhol's fame. The truth was complicated. They understood each other, but the spotlight around them grew even harsher. Where other people exoticized Basquiat, Warhol treated him as a fellow artist, not a symbol, not a street miracle, but as an artist. But unfortunately, when Warhol died in 1987, Basquiat lost one of the few people who truly understood him, and he never fully recovered from that loss. When Andy Warhol died in February 22, 1987, it was the beginning of a tragic downfall for Jean-Michel Basquiat, because Warhol had been one of the few people who saw Basquiat as both a serious artist and a human being. You see, Warhol acted as a stabilizing anchor in Basquiat's life. So when he died, that protection disappeared overnight. Basquiat felt abandoned and deeply affected. And that was when he started doing hard drugs. He became more withdrawn, suspicious, and sad. His drug use increased. He tried to stop it, he even traveled outside the country in an attempt to stop the drugs, but the damage was already deep. Basquiat's primary drug of choice was heroin. It became a every crush for him. That was the only thing that he knew how to use, heroin drugs. So as his wealth grew, his habits intensified. At the height of his addiction, it was reported that he was spending up to $2,000 a day on hard drugs. The world started viewing him through different lenses. They said he was a white child. Some people said he was a radiant child, a black man using drugs. The media portrayed him as a cliché of tragic artist. At that point in 1985, when he appeared on the cover of the New York Times magazine, he was pictured barefooted and wearing an expensive Armani suit, splashed with paint and artwork. The world saw a rebel in him, but behind that image was a man using drugs to reduce his pain, and people only liked him for his money, which was bad. But rather than help him out, people spoke about him like a case study, not as a human being. They said without Warhol, Basquiat was lost. Every missed meeting became proof. Every unfinished artwork became evidence. His grief was rewritten as weakness. And just then, the gossip shifted from the drugs abuse to sexuality. Basquiat was tagged a gay. He was said to be into men, which was the most terrible accusation that he had ever had in his life. The accusation of being gay or bisexual was frequently used by critics and rivals who wanted to paint him negatively. As usual, they started pitching his past life against him. For instance, the relationship he had with Andy Warhol. Some believe it was just a friendship. They said he was a sexual toy to Andy Warhol before he died. This accusation was not hidden. They were on the news every day. It was everywhere. During every interview with him, journalists asked him weird questions saying, "Why are you like this? Who are you really? Where do you belong? Are you gay?" Those were the questions that they were asking him, but Basquiat always refused to explain. At first, he would ignore them, but as human that he was, this accusation began to get to him. He started getting uncomfortable. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to do drugs and isolate from people. But behind the scene, Basquiat's health was declining. Basquiat was just 27 years old, but the things he had experienced throughout his lifetime were nothing short of trauma, abuse, and racism. And especially for the fact that he had lost his best friend, Andy Warhol. You see, Warhol's death was what shattered Basquiat the most. He had become reckless and he was taking $500 worth of heroin every day. Someone who was once vibrant and crowded now became sad and isolated. And at that moment in 1988, he dropped his final and most haunting artwork called Riding with Death. You see, Riding with Death artwork is widely believed to be Jean-Michel Basquiat's final painting, and it feels like a quiet, unsettling goodbye. The paint was simple but heavy. Let me explain. It shows a black skeletal figure, thin and fragile, riding on the back of a large figure that was representing death. There was no crown, there was no bold SAMO text, no explosive color like his early artworks. The background was just pale, silent, dark, and empty. By this time, Basquiat was deeply isolated. He felt abandoned by the art world. He was exploited by critique and he felt trapped in fame. His drug use had intensified, especially heroin. A lot of friends around him said he spoke often about dying young, even though he was only 27. He was no longer fighting death. He had submitted to the world. He had changed totally. Earlier in his career, death appears as something he could challenge or expose, but at that point in his life, it felt different. He had succumbed to death. He had been defeated. He withdrew almost completely. He walked alone, slept little, and trusted few people. It was almost as if it was the end of his life. He alone knew about it. By the time Riding with Death's painting was finished, the signs were no longer subtle. The painting did not come from imagination alone. It came from a life that was already gone. Even though he was alive, he was fading out quietly. In July 1988, he was in a desperate and final attempt to save himself. So Basquiat flew to Hawaii City to clean up the drugs inside his body system. But before going, he told his friends he wanted to get the heroin out of the system so he can be clean. Well, he went, and for a few weeks, it seems to work. So he returned to New York in early August looking healthier, claiming he was clean and excited about a planned trip to Ivory Coast to find spiritual healing. It seems as if he was recovering. But within days of returning to New York City, Basquiat relapsed. He took drug again. On the night of August 11th, 1988, he attended a party at the Bryan Gallery, but he left early. He was appearing sluggish and unwell. It was apparent that he had taken hard drugs once again, something that he said he was not going to do. Well, by the following afternoon, on August 12, 1988, Jean-Michel Basquiat was found dead in his apartment, having succumbed to mixed drugs which he took the night before. At just 27 years old, the king of the underground was gone, joining the tragic 27 Club. The same city that once watched him paint on subway walls now watched the ambulance carrying his body. News of his death spread fast. The art world reacted with shock. It was regret and it was sudden reference. The critic who doubted him spoke of his brilliance. Galleries rushed to protect his legacy. But for Basquiat, there was no second act, no coming back, no redemption. The pressure, the addiction, the isolation, they had already done their work. His death did not feel sudden. It felt like a conclusion that had been quietly building for years. And by the time the world realized he was gone, Basquiat had already said goodbye on his artwork and in silence. He was riding with the death along before it finally catch up with him. You see, Jean-Michel Basquiat did not leave behind answers. He left behind questions. How does a boy who slept on cardboard became a global icon and still died alone? How does the world celebrate genius but ignore the weight it placed on the person carrying it? In the end, Basquiat was not just an artist. He was a mirror. He reflected racism that hid behind fame and fame that came without protection. After his death, his painting grew louder than it ever did when he was alive. They sold millions of copies. Museums fought to own them. The same system that doubted him was now carving his name into history.
A legendary name in the art world has been etched into the streets of New York City. Today, a stretch of Great Jones Street in Lower Manhattan was officially renamed Jean-Michel Basquiat Way, honoring the iconic artist who lived and worked there during the height of his career.
The real question is, what we learned from losing him at a very young age? Because somewhere between the crown and the bones, between the fame and silence, Basquiat's story is still asking us something important. Why does the world wait for silence before it's listening? And why is pain the entrance for greatness? Why does fame arrive with love in public but cruelty in private? How many more geniuses must be broken before they are finally understood? Well, the question remains unanswered.
Let's talk a bit about the story that you're always being locked in the basement in order to paint.
That's just it has a nasty edge to it, you know. I mean, I was never locked anywhere. I mean, oh Christ. No, it's just, if I was white, they would just say artist in residence rather than say all that other stuff.
Hope you enjoyed the story. For more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification button so you won't miss other amazing documentaries like this one. You can also click here for more film and follow stories.